Hi, friends. Welcome to Unmatched. If you follow me on social media, especially on LinkedIn, you might have heard me speak about the concept of superfans. With third party cookies disappearing and consumer expectations increasing, smart marketers are focusing on a gold mine of information that their most loyal consumers hold. But this isn't just about gathering data or digital experiences, it's about something much more profound: the evolution of loyalty itself. How do we move beyond traditional loyalty programs to reward meaningful consumer actions? How can brands build a community of true superfans who not only love the product but become the most loyal advocates? To dive deep into these questions, we're joined today by Donovan Ratnasingam, co-founder and account director of Superfan. Donovan and his team are at the forefront of helping brands harness the power of first-party data to create meaningful, personalized experiences for their most valuable consumers. Don, welcome to Unmatched.
Hi, Oana. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the nice introduction.
It took us a while to get here because you're busy,
Yes.
I'm busy, but I'm so happy to have this conversation. It's one of the conversations that I've been honestly looking forward to have on the podcast because the topic of superfans is such an interesting one to me. And I want to start by talking about what superfan actually is, what do you guys do, and how do you utilize consumer actions to improve brand loyalty?
Sure, yeah. So I'll start off by basically what we essentially do. So actually, we are an agency called CONTENT-T, and we really focus on building digital experiences for brands. So that's something that we've been doing since 2020, and we've done this for brands across Asia mainly, and more recently bridging into the US and Europe as well. So we really focus on this niche of digital experience, mobile first digital experiences. So that's something we are used to. And through that, we've discovered certain pain points that brands face, right? Especially with engaging consumers, loyalty, transforming those engagement into something more than just a one-time experience where, they enter once and then they play the experience. So that's where we started to develop a new platform, more of a product for these brands to kind of integrate within digital experiences that will transform how consumers interact with that brand. So thus Superfan came about. Essentially, we want to transform those potential fans into actual superfans. And initially started off with focusing on first-party data. I really did focus on that because we did see the need of basically understanding your consumers a little bit more. And first-party data, when you aggregate those data, you get a profile of your consumer, and now you kind of understand what really resonates with them. And then we started to realize there is this huge potential when it comes to loyalty, because loyalty, for the most part, is really focused on the transactional aspect of it, right? A lot of times, we reward you for buying things. We reward consumers for buying things. But these days, it's everyone's doing it. So how do you differentiate yourself? And that's where the idea of action-based loyalty comes into play. And that's the whole idea of Superfan, where we basically allow brands to set challenges for the consumers within a digital experience or across their campaigns. For example, play this game, get a high score, enter the store and scan a QR code. So all these actions, we're able to actually track their progress. And then now you are able to personalize the rewards for those consumers. So it's a lot more than just a generic reward for buying something. It's basically rewarding you for your actions with the brand.
That's super interesting. And I want us to come back to that in a second. But first, let's talk about a little bit about how the concept of loyalty is actually changing. Where was the traditional concept, just maybe a few years ago? I mean, not that long ago, we were still talking about, CRM strategies in a very, let's say, old-fashioned kind of way. And where is this new approach going? Where do you think the whole concept of loyalty is going towards?
Yeah, I think of course, loyalty is a huge topic, right? There's a lot of facets to it. But if you look at it from where it was and where it is now, the first thing, the transition that we see is that how brands interact with the consumers when it comes to loyalty, developing that loyalty has kind of transitioned. We see more than just a CRM where you blast out an email, but essentially transitioning to maybe chat apps, communicating directly with consumers on chat apps. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the need for omni-channel integration. So that's something it's really key right now because there's so many channels. Everyone is on different channels. You have social media, you have your website, you have your retail offline channels. So how do you integrate loyalty across all these channels? So we see the need for that. And of course, the transition from just loyalty as transactions, right, to something more than that, because you're competing with a really stiff market, right? There's so many consumer brands out there are really trying to one up each other. And how do you stand apart when, especially this generation, they don't really care about loyalty, let's be honest, right? This Gen Z generation, it's more about which brand can give me the best value. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's kind of where I see loyalty has transitioned. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a very good point, and I was going to address the elephant in the room right after this question, which is consumer loyalty actually dead? Was it even ever a thing? I think that if I think back at my own experience as a consumer, growing up in Romania in the 80s, a communist country without too much access to brands, and literally we had like maybe 2-3 brands overall. I remember very clearly having specific memories with regards to certain brands and products, especially on the sneaker side of things, which is where I'm coming from, the industry that I'm coming from. So it's very close to my heart. Now I can imagine that, and I can see that with my kids right now. I mean, they have access to all the brands in the world. They have more than just one or two pairs of shoes, multiple brands, and Gen Z has access to everything on TikTok. They look at their peers, getting opinions on products and brands. Is it even a concept that we should be talking about, or should we actually reinvent the word loyalty into something else?
That's a really good question. That's a great thing to touch on. And I think how I see it is that loyalty has definitely transitioned to something different, right? Back in the days, how a brand builds loyalty for you is a lot different than what we see now because of all these new channels, right? We see social media, or we see the access to many brands. So I think redefining what loyalty is and how to approach loyalty is where I think the key is. Redefining how we build that loyalty, because maybe the story, the experience with the brand is more important than the product itself. And those are certain things where it still carries over from back then. The reason why I buy Apple products is because I really resonate with the lifestyle, the kind of ecosystem. Why I prefer a Nike sneaker is because of certain narratives. So yeah, those things carry over. But more than that, if you're looking further and deeper into loyalty, there is a shift in redefining how to approach loyalty.
Which is why I have to say, when I saw the name of your product, Superfan, I was so intrigued and excited, because not a lot of people talk about fans and super fans, and I think it's such a much better terminology to use when it comes to consumers, right? Because the way that I see it is, obviously we went from a certain amount of awareness, in the 90s 2000s you had mass media, and so that was large awareness that you were getting to. We were getting then with social media into the concept of followers, but not necessarily like super fans. And then now we're coming into an era of community, which is much closer to the brand. And I feel that more than loyalty, this group of people are a closer sort of knit group of fans of the brand. Some of them super fans, very, very restricted numbers though, that would be open to buy anything from a certain brand. So there's different layers to how we segment consumers, and I feel that it sort of trickles into consumer insights as well. It's how you look at your consumer base overall and how you create your consumer profiles. I don't really think that the old way of looking at consumer profiles still stands. You also have to kind of add in the layer of loyalty and look at how you segment your consumers that way. What's your point of view? I mean, you named your product Superfan. Clearly you have a point of view on that.
Yeah, I think that point about community, that is one of the key points where if you really want to build some would say true loyalty, it's not you telling the consumer to kind of purchase your product. It's their surrounding, their community in essence, right? Their friends, their family, the people they associate with, resonating with that brand together with them. So building that community is super important. Of course, superfans, it's not as easy said than done, right? To cultivate superfans for your brands, but it's something that you do over time, and how you get to that point is through all the things you do within your existing marketing campaigns, with your digital experiences, with how you personalize communications with your consumers. So yes, I think nailing it down, it would be the community aspect of building that growing super fans for your brand.
You guys work with some really big brands out there, both in Asia but also in the US. And I know you've worked with brands like Tommy Hilfiger and Coach. What are some of those innovative strategies that you've seen work well in rewarding consumer actions beyond just the purchase and the typical experience that we normally talk about?
Yeah, so because our focus is a very specific focus, which is mobile first digital experiences. So we do all these, we utilize gamification, AR, recently AI as well, because it's something that we've seen a huge potential, developing experiences that are truly unique, where the outcome is different for everyone. So how we apply this in terms of how we engage the consumers and tie in loyalty, it's a very interesting approach that we've been experimenting on, and finally we've realized that hey, this actually works. In, for example, when it comes to Coach, one of their biggest goal was actually to drive more market share for their a very specific bag, which is their tabby bag, right? And it's specific to Gen Z. They want to drive this, they want to make this bag the Gen Z bag. And one of our approach for this region was actually applying that strategy of action-based loyalty, right? As they go to every pop-up, or if there's a digital experience, every action that you do rewards you. It could be something digital, it could be an invite to a next event. So all these little things build that relationship with the consumer. So this is what we noticed, that having this framework to actually engage and then actually communicate with your consumer, reward them, not just for purchases, but also for their actions, really help position Coach as a really strong, especially this bag, a very strong consumer product among the Gen Z. That's one part. Another part would be the fact that we are doing digital experiences. Digital experiences would be one of those channels that is truly different than, let's say, an ad, because it's one of those ways where you can actually interact with your consumer for the first time ever, right? They can actually interact with your brand. And that is a very powerful way of communicating with the consumer if done right. Being able to storytell and get them to interact with your story as a brand. So that really changed the game for us. And that is one of the reasons why COVID really accelerated what we were doing, because at that time, everyone's indoor. So how are you supposed to go to a retail store, right? So those kind of strategies really help the brands that we work with in the region.
I'm really curious about this idea of cultural differences. You guys operate quite a lot in APAC, but you also operate in the US. I wonder if there's, in your experience, any big cultural differences when it comes to consumer loyalties based on the markets that you've had experience with.
Yeah, there definitely are differences that we see. Some of the differences may just be down to the way they receive communications and prefer to receive communication. For example, within this region, WhatsApp is huge. So being able to communicate on WhatsApp is a powerful way of actually cultivating loyalty. Another interesting fact is that if you look at, let's say, for example, a gamification experience, certain games speak better to certain regions. So it's very interesting. We did this pinball game for Coach a couple of years ago, and it did really well in specific regions, but some other regions didn't really hit as well. So this kind of data of user behavior really helps us kind of understand what to deploy kind of experiences to do for those brands. And it could also be down to the population. Is it more of a population that consists of more Gen Z versus millennials? So these kind of things really impact how the consumers resonate with the experience. So mechanics, the kind of channels that you communicate with, and also, of course, localizing. Localizing is so important. Being able to, let's say, even if you have a global campaign, localizing aspects of this campaign, the messaging, and the way the mechanics of the experience interact with the consumer, those things make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because we always talk about this global culture and approach to strategy, especially in big
Yeah.
brands, right? You can't really just stay in your global, sort of ivory tower. You have to really trickle things
Yeah.
down into local experiences that make sense for local consumers. So, having seen, a bit the evolution of that over time, for you when you enter a new market, how do you, especially maybe a market that you're not necessarily super aware of and don't have big experience with yet, how do you research the local consumers and tap into that local way of understanding experiences, gamification, tools, digital tools maybe, and just in general the concept of loyalty?
Yep, that's that's a very good part of what we do. A very important part, actually, especially entering a new market. For example, more recently we were exploring entering into like the UAE market and seeing what kind of experiences resonate with them. The research really comes down to seeing what worked first, right? Understanding what worked in the region first is super important, especially when it comes to the type of experience. That is usually where we start off. And understanding what resonate with that region and the consumers in that region. So it always starts like that. And then from there, we start to understand, okay, what are the kind of experience we can explore? Because at the end of the day, most of the time mechanics are very similar. Like the kind of games that you can, let's talk about games, the kind of gameplay mechanics that you can create are very similar. It's mostly been done, and you want to use these similar mechanics but personalize it in your own way, right? Something that's been proven. So that's how we approach it. We take a look at what works and then from there tailor it to that brand.
Now, I want to switch gears a little bit into the topic of technology, because I think that when it comes to loyalty specifically, the access that a certain culture, consumers have to technology and the way that they interact with technology must play a super big role in how brands can interact with those consumers. Talk to me a little bit about what were some of your findings within that area of what kind of technology right now do brands need to look into, what kind of tools, what kind of strategies from a technical perspective that would work both globally and locally.
Okay, I think for this, I think there's two things that really stand out for me right now. But there's a lot, right? There's many we can touch on, but I'll touch on two things that I feel like are really, really important to look at. And the first one, I know it's a buzzword everywhere, but AI is the first one because it really changes the way you can do experiences. I know I talk a lot about this word experience. It's just because that's what we do for brands, right? And AI, when you not just for creating content. So we see a lot of brands now take AI and use AI models to actually create content, right? Existing AI tools to create content, create billboard, create ads, maybe create their own AI influencer, all these things. But the other type of use would be to create campaigns that the consumer are interacting with your AI experience. So this is something that's so different than what we used to before, and it truly allows hyper personalization, right? For example, a simple thing as a quiz with a personalized outcome. It can truly be personalized based on your response, which has never been done before, right? Before this, it'll be a preset answer, for example. We're working on a couple AI campaigns right now, and another thing is generative AI, right? Generative images, being able to, let's say, for example, a brand creates this campaign and you allow the consumer to tell, where would you like to see yourself with this bag? And you can type in something and you can see yourself in that place, personalized to you. These are things that's never been able to be done before. So I feel it's a super important part for brands to look at and not overlook, because there'll be really cool experiences that we've never seen before being deployed using AI. So that would be the first one. The second part is more of a physical side, would be the use of NFC. It's not so new, NFC. It's relatively, it's been around, but using NFC as part of your physical pop-up experiences and using it to access digital experiences, this is something that is not really used, where as opposed to QR. But there's a lot of advantage to NFCs, especially within your own product or within a pop-up, tapping your phone to kind of interact with an experience. So this is something that I feel like we've recommended to a few brands, and we're starting to deploy those kind of campaigns to tie kind of physical on ground to the online. And there's actually a third one. It's been a little bit more quiet, but the Web3 space, there is still potential there when it comes to digital wearables, for example. I think that kind of category of experiences, being able to create digital wearables, has now carried over onto the gaming landscape. So we see brands now collaborating with spaces like Roblox. And this is a trend because consumers are spending a lot of time online on this digital so-called metaverses or these virtual spaces, and physical products are not possible to be used in these spaces. And if brands are not thinking this is important, your virtual avatar, the player that you use to play these games all the time is not important, well, you'll be left behind, because it's super important for this generation. Being able to wear an outfit for my favorite brand in this virtual space, that is another place where I think brands should be looking at and not missing out.
Which I have to say, from a brand perspective, having worked in many different brands for many years, it feels a bit overwhelming. Like, what do we focus on? Where do we focus our investment, our attention? Budgets these days are not obviously as big as they used to be. They're not infinite also, and it seems that the consumer is changing at such an quick pace that I'm not really sure how brands can keep up. What are some of the main challenges that you are facing, or that you're seeing brands face in this effort of trying to connect with consumers and establishing brand loyalty?
I think you have a very good point. That is definitely a major challenge. Where do you go, right? Where do you allocate your budget that makes sense? Because nobody has an infinite budget for marketing or creating campaigns. So that's definitely one of the challenges. Another challenge would be, I want something new and different. However, most things are not new and different. So this is the challenge, and brands do not want to repeat things that's been done before. But unfortunately, you kind of have to at times, right? But you have to package it differently. You have to really transform the way it's delivered. So this is the thing where brands are constantly competing. I want to have this exclusively for myself. I want this really unique game, but my budget is limited. So this is a constant
Sounds
balance.
familiar.
So it's a very common thing, and we understand, you want the best and the biggest experiences, but of course, budgets are limited. So that's another challenge. And the third, the other challenge would be actually unifying all your channels and where you engage them. So if you boil it down to being able to engage your consumers, you have multiple channels that you can engage, and not capitalizing on being able to capture them, and understand that you unify all these channels so that whenever that consumer enters another channel, it's not like a new consumer. You recognize them already. It's also one of the reasons why we've built Superfan, because at the very the first part of Superfan is being able to capture and then verify the consumer. Just like a single sign-on tool that you use to sign on to any website or an app, you get an OTP and you're verified. Whereas the common practice is to actually have a form and you verify later on, or you might not even verify, you just toss it into your CRM. So being able to integrate this form of unification is another challenge, because there's just so many channels. But if you have one tool to just plug it into all these channels, you're good. You have that. You're not leaving consumers on the table, potential fans that you can nurture. So yeah.
So you're making such a good point here, because when you think about brand loyalty, although the word may be a bit obsolete these days, somehow we're immediately thinking about CRM. But then you also have so many other channels, and you talked about integrating all those different channels into one strategy focused on building those super fans and nurturing also those super fans. Do you have like a interesting example from your experience of a brand that has done that successfully and how they've done it?
Yep. So because Superfan is relatively new, so convincing brands to integrate across all the channels is also a challenge at the start. but we're starting to make leeway now in these brands. I can't speak so much for everything because we're still working on certain things, but brands like Coach that we work very closely with, especially in this region, we are working with them to integrate into various different touch points, right? So the first touch point would be online, right? A microsite, a digital experience, that's the first touch point. Another one would be a physical pop-up that they have. They launch a lot of physical pop-ups, and being able to understand that this consumer came from where, and recognizing that, hey, they went online and they also went to the pop-up. They are more engaged than other fans, right? So, and then there is also this recent trend of brands, especially fashion brands, kind of entering into the F&B space with cafes, where we see this trend where, because they realize, they're shopping, they might need something to drink, and coffee is a lifestyle, so we connect it with the coffee culture, and now you are bridging that gap. So now integrating your consumer behavior, capturing those consumers within these channels as well, is another area that you can integrate. So that is one of the examples. Another example would be a campaign that we recently did for Kate Spade. What we did was we integrated kind of like a user journey throughout this experience. It's a physical experience. There is a digital tie-in to it. Traditionally, how we would do this is that we will just have an experience. At the very end, you complete, you get your reward. But along the way, you're not really able to track whether they've completed it. You're not really able to track whether they redeemed their reward. Everything's done manually. So how we changed it with Superfan is now we're able to track your progress as you go through this journey. Even if it's a storytelling experience, you go through each checkpoint, you learn something about this new collection, this new messaging, the cause that they are pushing for. And then at the end, once you've completed that, you get to redeem your ice cream. For this case, it was ice cream, right? So simple things like this, automating this process and being able to understand the consumers and continuation later on, that's where the brands are starting to jump on.
I am very, very, very excited about quizzes. And I've started to learn more and more about them. I started to integrate them into my business as well. And I've seen such amazing results, probably because everyone loves to learn something new about themselves all the time. And we're all excited about figuring out maybe a new angle of our personality and things that we didn't really know about ourselves. And also, it's a way to hyper personalize a brand experience in a way. So I'm fascinated about this topic, and it's something that I really want to double down on with Unmatched. My question is around brand evolution, linked to quizzes, because of course there's big brands that have not infinite budgets, but they do have large budgets to work on capturing and nurturing their fans and super fans. When you start a new brand, when you start a new business, your budget is inexistent or or much lower than that. But you still need to capture and nurture and develop those super fans. And what typically happens is that smaller brands tend to have more super fans, and they are much closer to them. They know them quite well. Typically, there's a founder figure that is part of that community from the get-go. And there's a reason why those super fans are so close to the brand, is because they know the person behind the brand, and they've been part of that building experience from day one. So how can those small brands still capture, nurture their super fans, even when they don't have access to, large budgets in order to do so?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And you touched on quizzes. Quizzes are a lower cost way of kind of engaging your consumer, understanding them better. I think utilizing existing AI tools would be one way to look at it, because they are relatively more cost efficient for what you're getting out of it. And because when you put out a quiz, you kind of have to give a carrot in return to the consumer if you want them to complete that quiz. And sometimes the carrot would be something unique that you give them at the end of the quiz. It doesn't necessarily need to be a reward, but a lot of times it goes towards that, you get a voucher, you get something that you can spend on. But it can be something unique, and AI can help with that, generating something unique. So I'm looking at it that way. That's one way, utilizing this quiz and integrating AI. Another way would be actually to use this. You have these tightly knit community that you've built, your super fans for a smaller brand, right? Kind of empowering them, and I don't use the word weaponizing them, but kind of uh, getting them to spread the word for you works like a charm a lot of times. And that's what I see a lot of these smaller brands do, right? And you can use digital activations to kind of launch that. One example would be a simple personalization experience, right? For example, personalize this greetings card, seasonal, and then share it to all your friends and family. And then that's how you get your fans to share your brand across. So kind of getting your community, leveraging your community would be where I would start at as a smaller brand with smaller budget.
Amazing. In looking forward now and more into the future, let's say in the next 12, 18 months, 24 months ahead of us, what sort of trends do you see emerging that are starting to pop up and gain more and more, strength in the market when it comes to nurturing those super fans?
Yep. I think in terms of the trends, because of what the kind of technology we have now, I think the first thing is hyper personalization. That's something, it's a term that people have used but never really achieved, if it makes sense. So, hyper personalization is very hard to achieve at scale because you can never really be hyper personalized to that individual because you're marketing, you're doing a campaign for a broad market. But with the use of AI, with the use of frameworks that track progress, track your interaction with the brand, now you can actually have something hyper personalized because that's what AI is able to deliver for you, right? AI combined with a framework, now you can have as if it's the consumer brand has come down from its pedestal and then is now having a conversation with you. And that's truly profound, in my opinion. I feel like that's something that really transforms the way marketing will be looked at and advertising will be looked at. So that's one. Another one, what I see would be community-centric loyalty programs. So that goes back again to our conversation of superfans. Using your community as a driver for your loyalty programs, very community-based loyalty programs, because what we notice, if you take a look at the NFT boom would be a good example, right? When this boom of the NFT space just skyrocketed, and what was driving it was these pockets of communities that grew from a niche, from a counterculture perspective or underground community that suddenly became more mainstream. So we look at that and we see how powerful community-centric approach is, and then this is where loyalty comes in. So community-centric loyalty is something that I think could be the next trend as well. And of course, predictive analysis, something because of all the user behavior. Of course, there is this question of privacy, super important question, something that it's also very important to look at. But apart from, like, even if you take out the idea of privacy, you anonymize the data and then you just understand the behavior of your consumers as a community. Now you can actually predict the kind of experiences that you can do that will be more effective for this community. So you don't necessarily need consumer exact profiles of the consumer, just a kind of like an overview, and utilizing first party data, utilizing understanding of consumer behavior with digital experiences, you can actually predict what can work with a higher success rate. So I think those are some of the trends that you could see.
These are really good. And I want to not forget about this last point that you just mentioned, because I think it's really crucial, especially for product led brands. Because the old way of looking at consumer profiles and consumer loyalty was linking it very much to the use case of the product, right? So, how do my
Yes.
consumers buy my product? How do they use my product? And everything around consumer profiling was built around that. I think that that's completely shifting into how do my consumers behave? What communities are they part of? What social media trends are they following? What are the vibes, as everyone is talking about? It's not so much about, brand positioning is more about the vibes. I don't know if I want
Yep.
to agree with that yet, because I feel like vibes is like so fleeting. It's like, oh, how do you measure vibes? I don't know. It's so subjective, but still there's an element of truth in there, which talks to the fact that actually consumers now engage much more with each other in smaller groups, in smaller communities, as you mentioned, and that's how they build their affinity and interest to relevant brands in their scope, right, in their environment. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, there is a definite case to be made for that. I see it also not because one thing that is very clear is that with the advent of social media, and we see that people taking social media content sometimes as truth, as fact, right? Without like, I catch myself doing it. If you say you're not, you're lying, because at times you can't help but get caught off guard, and this is you see this content and oh, this is what I want because what this person said. So in that sense, brands are kind of moving towards this providing kind of for this social media culture, going with the vibes. So there is some truth to that. But I also think there needs to be a combination of truly understanding the behavior when that consumer does their actions within digital experiences or any kind of experience that the brand does, because you would really know whether it works or not from those campaigns.
Yeah,
So,
so
but yes, definitely makes a really really important point what you've shared.
yeah, and also I feel like product quality is not something that we need to forget about when we're saying this, right? It's more like it's a different topic on top. The use case of the product, the quality of the product, longevity of the product are just different aspects from
Yes.
loyalty and consumer profiling, because the way consumers behave are just very different, and they're not focused necessarily on the product unless you are a very low sort of entry level brand that gives very functional products.
Mhm.
The last question that I have for you is one thing that brands think about all the time when they look at how to invest their budget, which is how do we measure our investment? How do we measure if our investment in our superfans is worth it? How do we measure if our initiatives on our consumer loyalty experiences are working? So what are ways that we can use as brands to measure all these initiatives?
Yep, that's a very important point. And the tricky thing is that a lot of the metrics we see now only tells one side of the story, right? No matter what, even as an agency myself, no matter what an agency tells you, this metric, that metric, the reality is that it only tells one part of the story. Truly understanding, how effective, like what is that KPI, what is that number? Oh, this number shows that I've done really well as a campaign. I've successfully done this campaign. It's very tricky. So how we look at it is that we look at it in the sense of how are you gaining actual engagement? That's the first thing. How to determine actual engagement and how this engagement can be transformed into something more, right? So it can be a purchase. It can be leading them down towards being someone that interacts with your brand more often. But the thing is, this is a very subjective thing. So to me, I feel a very important metric is true engagement, actual true engagement value, if you would say. So these are some of the metrics that we are building into our system. So for us, we take into account very specific actions. So this is something that we are still working on, and there are certain things that we're working on behind the scenes, proprietary stuff to really measure how well your campaign has done. And this involves taking really key actions that you do within an experience and then combining that to give you a metric that actually measures true engagement value, if you would like. So that's something that we could say. Obviously, there is no way we can guarantee sales. For example, there's no way we can guarantee just because you have a lot of engagement, you are going to get a lot of sales. But understanding the actual true value that your campaign has gotten out of those engagement is where it's at, right? Understanding whether it's just vanity, it's just, oh, so many people entered, but they never got understood what we're doing, versus it's also they've entered, they have experienced, and they are excited to come to the next one. So, and then eventually buying into that brand because, their community is part of that brand.
Yeah, and also not forgetting that it takes a long time for consumers to actually get to
Yes,
the moment
yes,
of purchase, right?
yes.
Because we
Very
always
true.
talk
Yeah.
about that. It's about 7 hours of engagement, 14 different platforms, four different, touch points. So it's like it's not so easy, and it's really to your point. There's no one metric that can tell you that. And also as
Yeah.
a brand, I think it's really useful to look at it from a very holistic point of view. You have to link
Yes.
whatever you do to certain metrics for sure, but also to certain channels that you're directing those initiatives on, and also to think a bit out of the box in terms of what exactly you're trying to get from that initiative. So I think such a good point that you're making, that actually there's no one metric that can tell you how good one initiative is doing. If you're saying that, you're lying to yourself, and it's a little bit going into the vanity metrics direction, which with big brands we all need in order to sell things internally. But the reality of it is that it's much more complex than that. Don, I really appreciate this conversation. I feel like we could have just continued for much longer, because it's such
Yeah.
a fascinating topic. It's also such a quickly evolving a topic that I think that probably if we sit down in 12 months, we're going to add more things to the
Yeah.
conversation, because consumers evolve and brands should evolve as well. So thank you so much for coming on Unmatched.
Thanks, Oana.